Hey you guys, what's going on? It's Rick with Rick's Toy Room, and I'm finally getting to do this video. As you can see in the background, Killer Instinct is running. I finally got the machine finished, and I want to actually talk about how I got it to work, what I did to it, the whole project as a whole. And so this video is going to be a little bit longer because, like I said, I'm going to talk about what my intentions were, how I got it to work, and I'm going to give you a little history of MAME configuration for a minute. So get yourself a cup of coffee with me, and let's get started, shall we? All right. So my initial plan was, actually, I had no initial plan. I had no intentions on owning this. It just happened to be that the guy that did own it had converted the machine to a MAME cabinet. So if you don't know what MAME is, it is a multi-arcade machine emulator. It's computer software designed to run the ROM images, so like your little ROM chips. Arcade enthusiasts and collectors and archivists have been copying arcade ROM chips to computers, and they made an emulator that could basically fake arcade hardware so you could play arcade games on your PCs. Well, fast forward, many people started making arcade replicas and MAME cabinets that had hundreds of thousands of games running off of a PC to a either VGA, CGA monitor or a LCD monitor through HDMI, and they basically would fake the games playing inside either shells of real arcade cabinets or custom built versions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what the owner did for this one is he had the boards that he owned, the original JAMA hardware he owned for this real arcade machine had failed. So he put in a PC, hooked up his video card, bought an adapter. In this case, he was using the JPAC. We'll talk about that in a second. Hooked up a JPAC, hooked up a computer, and turned it into a MAME machine. So him and his kids could play a bunch of different games on the machine. And essentially, the kids only liked one game. They got bored with it. And he's like, I need space to be able to work in the garage. I've got other machines that need build, so I'm going to put it up for sale. So my boy puts it up for sale, and he's got it listed for like $1,200. Now, for the $1,200, here's what you are getting. You are getting a real Nintendo Midway Killer Instinct arcade cabinet, real Midway Nintendo arcade controls, a real CGA monitor, the real marquee. Like, this is all original, minus the Raspberry Pi I've got in it right now. So it's all original hardware, the transformer, the power brick, everything except for there's no Killer Instinct JAMA board. Originally, he was going to sell it with the original hardware plus the PC and the JPAC for $1,200. And I was like, I don't like the idea of owning other people's used PCs in my house and on my networks. You never know what's on. You never know what's deleted and still sitting in memory on the drives. There's just a lot of reasons why I don't deal with used PCs. So I was like, hey, I don't want your PC. I don't want your JPAC. Sell me the cabinet for $500. I will restore it, or I will buy the JAMA board, put the original JAMA board back in it. I will have a fully functioning KI. I've always loved this game. This was another one of my like top 10 fighters. The game was just I had a lot of love for this game. Okay. And he was like, nah. And I've worked with Dennis before. Like, I bought Hydro Thunders from him. He's helped with some parts and some configuration through Village BBS. So me and Dennis have got like cool history. Like, we're not besties, but we're cool. Like, we've dealt with each other before. So go on about a week, maybe two, and Dennis hits me up. He's like, hey, I can't move the machine and I really need it out of the garage. He's like, you got a deal. Give me $500. You can take the cabinet. I'm keeping the PC. I'm like, that's what I wanted anyhow. So me and Dusty get a U-Haul. We run over to Dennis's place, and he lives right down the road. So we zip over to his house, and I'm talking to him. I'm like, I've looked at what the JAMA boards are going to cost me, and they're like $1,300 to $1,800 for a working Killer Instinct board set. And that's the main JAMA board and the hard drive that is used to run the game. The problem is the hard drives fail consistently. So, and especially for the age of this cabinet. I mean, this thing is like 1993. So a old Western Digital or old Seagate, disk style hard drive, they're not going to last 20 plus years. So a lot of people, I either then have to buy or build the upgrade kit and switch it to a compact flash, or I roll the dice with a untested board and see if I can ever get it working. And it wasn't. I love this game, but it's not $1,800 love. Okay, so I was like, my plan is to put a Raspberry Pi in here because I know the Pi 4 and Pi 5 can run Killer Instinct flawlessly. So I was like, let me buy the cabinet, and I was like, once you save me some headache and wiring, sell me the JPack, and then I can just run, HDMI to VGA, plug in the Pi, configure it, we're off to the races. And I had a couple extra Pis laying around the house. So here's a Pi 5, 4 gig. I was like, I've got a couple in the house. Fine, let's do it. So $550 for the cabinet, another $65 for the U-Haul for the day. I'm in for $610, $620, whatever the math on that is. And I'm like, that is an acceptable price for a Killer Instinct. It's, again, if you've watched my NBA Jam Restore video, I don't like to spend more than $500 for an arcade, working or not. As long as there's enough parts for me to get it working fairly cheap, or if I can put in parts I already have, no more than $600 on an arcade. So $630, again, in my budget. I'm like, let's do it. Me and Dusty get it loaded. We get it back to the house. We get it in the house. And I'm like, cool. Open it up. Hook up the JPack. And before I get into that, let's do a couple quick history and some adapters. So the JPack is a JAMA edge connected circuit board that essentially translates input video signal out to the pin headers here, or the edge connector here, to the cables for the wiring of the arcade machine that connects it to the neck board, etc., the monitor, the speakers, the lights, all the things. And then it's got these actual terminals that you would wire in all the extra buttons for games like Killer Instinct that have 6 buttons. Okay, so that's what this does. Now, if you don't want to get as fancy, or if you're not using original arcade monitor, VGA monitor screens, if you're doing like an HDMI, you can go and do something much cheaper and do the iPack. Now, this is a very, very old iPack because it still has the old PC monitor connections in the back and a real toggle switch to activate all kinds of things. But this is essentially the first version of a JPack, what they call the iPack. So what that does is it just translates terminal buttons out via PC connectors. This is actually a PC mouse and PC keyboard. It wasn't monitors, excuse me. So you'd hook up your PC keyboard, you'd hook a cable up to go from here to the PC's keyboard input, and you would, in the emulator, configure these terminals for all the buttons. Okay, so this was the much older rudimentary version, and this is a much more updated plug and play. So the idea was to take this Raspberry Pi, hook up the HDMI mini to HDMI, VGA adapter into VGA, out to what I thought at the time was a VGA monitor. And if you were using something like the NBA Jam behind me, or if you were using, again, an old PC monitor with VGA that you would just hook up and put in this cabinet if the monitor didn't work or you don't want to play with it, etc., these solutions are great. They're just plug and play, good to go. Well, here's what we found out. I originally hooked up the HDMI to the VGA adapter, VGA to the JPack, JPack to the JAMA harness, to the arcade, and turned it on. We got nothing. No video, no nada. So I spent probably about 3 days fighting with the Retrocade configuration that we installed on the Pi and testing every video output, and I couldn't get anywhere. Just couldn't get any video going. So I hit Google, and Google's like, oh, well, you're using the Raspberry Pi. And by Google, I just mean random website forum that I found through links reading, etc. They're like, oh, you're using the Raspberry Pi 5. Well, the 5 changed its architecture, and instead of doing the VGA output via configurable signal on the HDMI, it all now goes through the GPIO, which are these pin headers, on top that are connected to the Pi, and these are basically, think of them as kind of just like hot wires, switches, buttons, whatever. So I find out, oh, you have to buy a special adapter for the Raspberry Pi 5 to get VGA. And what that adapter is this little thing here called the VGA 666. All right, VGA 666 DPI. And essentially what it does is it takes your Raspberry Pi, you plug it into the top of it, like so. Then you take your VGA cable and you go from here to what essentially is now the JPAC, and you send VGA signal through this little header, through the cable, to this adapter, out the edge connector to the screen. I wasn't happy about that because, I mean, this is a $30 part, okay? So I'm like, I got to spend another $30 on a machine that I'm already kind of at my spending limit with, okay? And I'm like, all right, another 30, I'm at like 650. Still not terrible. You know, one extra adapter, no problem. So I order it, it comes in, hook it all up, and now I'm getting a scrambled screen. So now I'm making progress, okay? I've got a Raspberry Pi 5 sending signal to this little adapter, this adapter to that adapter, and I'm getting a scrambled screen. So I work on the adjustment board, and I can't get it stable. Back to the internet, do some more searching, and after running probably 4 days of configurations, testing, etc., and talking to a bunch of guys, I find out something even more aggravating. That's not a VGA monitor. So Midway and Nintendo basically needed a different version of a monitor to handle the types of graphics they were pushing through the Ultra 64 hardware, which any of my gamer friends and hobbyists out there know. Ultra 64 was the code name. Well, it was the pre-production name of the Nintendo 64. And that's another history lesson. But so the Ultra 64 hardware needed a different resolution monitor. So these jokers put in what's called a CGA monitor, and it uses a different set of frequencies. So now what I've got is a major problem, okay? Because I cannot use this $30 adapter to connect to this $50 adapter to play on that monitor. Now, if I were to use this adapter and hook it up to this $30 cheap monitor that I bought at the pawn shop during this progress to see what was going on, it works flawlessly. VGA out of the Raspberry Pi through the header, beautiful. I mean, it looks really good on this HDMI, this little LCD monitor, and I was quite shocked. And I was like, well, I could rip that monitor out and put in this. And I'm like, that's stupid. That is uncalled for. That is ridiculous. I'm not taking working good vintage hardware and replacing it for no valid reason other than I can't get this stupid Raspberry Pi to work. So I had to make I did some more research, and I talked to a couple other guys, and they came up with, well, there is a piece of hardware designed to solve this problem, because apparently more arcade machines around this time started doing CGA monitors, and there's a company that made a product called the RPiCade. And what it is, it's another Raspberry Pi GPIO hat that sits on top of the Raspberry Pi. Or, excuse me, this one actually connects via ribbon cable, but it connects to the Raspberry Pi's GPIO pins, and it has a JAMA edge connector, and it plugs right into the arcade machine, and it has an adapter for extra wires, and it's specifically designed to output CGA signal, so it's plug and play with the cabinet. The problem is that's $170. And I'm like, dude, that puts me at like $800 for this machine. And I'm like, now I'm starting to grind my teeth, right? Because I'm like, that's just not, it's not what I like to spend. And especially if I'm emulating the hardware. Like, I'm not, when you saw this video, you know that I'm not a perfectionist on how the graphics need to look. I'm not a perfectionist on the machines. I do like them to have a little, what's the word I'm looking for here? Personality, right? I want the cabinets to feel like they were in the arcade and they were played and they were used and they're original hardware. I really like when I'm working with arcade machines to be original hardware. Yes, emulators work great. Emulators look good, like play okay on computers. But they never had that same feel until now. So I I was like, I don't want to spend 170 bucks on this adapter, because it was like 150 for the adapter. It was like another $20 for, they pre-built the kick harness for me, so they already like ran the wires and the stupid little connector that pins to it and all the things. And I'm like, okay, well, that's an option. I'm going to talk to the guys and see if there's other options. So I was talking to the guys in Village BBS, and, it really came down to, like, there was a bunch of other conversions I could have done. There's a couple other adapters I could have tried that were cheaper. And I'm like, I don't want to keep spending small chunks of money on adapters that are not working. Like I said, I'm 50, 30, another 50 in cables. I mean, I'm already at I was at 620, ended up about close to $700. And I'm like, I just don't want to keep putting in small chump change on a maybe work solution, when for 170 bucks, I can have a real working solution. So my options were spend 1,800 and buy the real JAMA board and put it in this machine, or spend 170, get the Pi running, and I can either have the Pi boot directly into Killer Instinct so that it looks like it's a, real hardware machine, and then do configurations to switch into other games, KI2, etc. And I was thinking about it. I was like, well, maybe I could sell this thing. I could build it, get it working, and then sell it for some profit at a, much more updated version of a MAME cabinet. Because with a Pi HDMI, there's a lot more world that opens up when you use the Pi and not like a 60-in-1. So I thought about it for about, I want to say maybe an hour. And after about an hour of contemplating it and just talking to Dusty, bouncing ideas off him, I'm like, fuck it. 170 bucks. Again, supposed to be plug and play, specifically for CGA monitors. Let's do it. Let's go. So order the adapter, and this was right around Christmas. So it took a little bit to get here. It came in the first of the year, and I got really excited. It was here, and it was super easy to put together. I mean, literally, you take the Raspberry Pi. It's got 4 legs that hold the Raspberry Pi to this RPiCade header. It has a ribbon cable that runs from that into the top of the Pi. You plug that in, turn it on. It has it had the HDMI mini to the HDMI input on the header, and then it had, the hat, and then it had a little audio cable to run audio from here to that, and everything works. It's supposed to be. Plug it all in. Now, this thing did not come with instructions, so I'm going to caveat this next section here for a minute on the fact that there were no instructions. And to be honest, plug and play to me means plug and play, and I didn't look up any kind of instructions. And to be honest, after all the things that I'm about to tell you about happened, when I looked up the instructions, they still don't tell you shit. So I take the Raspberry Pi, I hook it up, do all the things. I run power to it, I run the HDMI to it, and I plug in the JAMA adapter to the edge connector. Throw the switch. Nothing. I got a red light on the Pi. The Pi's not booting. Arcade machine is just scrolling a black screen. Can't figure out what the fuck's going on. Play with it. Nothing. So I'm like, something's not making sense here. I unhook the ribbon cable and I hit the power, and the Pi boots. Green light. It's running. And I can hear audio. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So mess with it. Unhook the ribbon cable, run the HDMI directly to the monitor. Everything's working. I'm like, what is going on? So back to the forums, back to the PiCade website, their forums. And what I get told is, oh, how are you hooking up the power? You don't power the Pi and hook up the JAMA connector, because at that point you're sending 5 volts into the Pi, 5 volts out the GPIO, 5 volts into the GPIO, 10 volts to a 5 volt edge connector, and then 10 volts through 5 volt lines into the arcade. So you're basically overcharging the system. And I was like, oh. So I unhooked the power to the Raspberry Pi, and I run just the 5 volts from the arcade JAMA adapter into the GPIO. And I'm still getting a red light. more testing, more conversations, and find out that the power supply inside here is some janky little aftermarket, and it's 5 volt is not steady. It's around 485. So I crank up the power coming out of the power supply, which really isn't good for all the hardware involved. I end up pushing about 13 volts through the 12-volt line, and then I was getting about 4.951 on the 5-volt line into the Pi, but it still wasn't stable, and it wasn't enough wattage to keep the Pi booting, so the Pi wouldn't boot. So after a couple hours of banging my head on the table and waiting for people to reply, I was like, I've got an idea. Let's disconnect the 5-volt lines coming out of the JAMA harness at the arcade's PSU. Let's unhook the 5 volts, and let's run power straight from the Pi into the GPIO, into the JAMA, into the arcade. Okay, let's try it. As soon as I do that, she fires up. Full green light on the Pi, boots, the screen starts to flicker. I've got the emulators and I've got KI running. Okay. Now, mind you, this entire troubleshooting, wires, all this took me like 5 days of just screaming, yelling, kicking, configuration testing, remoting into the Raspberry Pi, all the things. So I was like, dude, okay. So we were happy. Like at this point, it's like 11 o'clock at night. Okay. So we'd been working on it all week. It's like Friday at 11 o'clock at night. And I'm like, okay, it's working. Now it's time to configure everything. So hooked up the extra 6 buttons, and I hook up a keyboard, and I'm basically in every single game configuring all the buttons. Now, these wires don't have numbers. They don't match any like, this is button 3, 4, 5, 6. Like it's just, here's 4 wires, here's 4, go. So I had to go into every game, load it up, press a button, see what the button did, go into the configuration, say I want this button to be this match in the config, and I configured all the buttons. Then after I did that, I realized that the coin switches on this cabinet are screwed. They're old, they're foobarred, they need to be replaced. And I'm like, all right, let's configure free play on everything. So I go back into every game. Some games you can configure free play right from the main menu. Some you had to trigger a test switch and then do it in a test menu. Killer Instinct, for example, you had to get into the test menu, then you had to get into the emulator's dip switch settings, and then set the dip switches that are compatible with the configuration for free play. And if you don't know what a dip switch is, think of this as like a dip switch. So you got this bank of anywhere from 4 to 10 per game, and they have just little switches on and off. And they're basically old style computer circuit board ones and zeros that equate to a programmatic code on the board that says this configuration, if this is on, this is off, equals this config. So set the dip switch settings. Now I got free play on Killer Instinct. So I get it all configured, right? Really excited. Now, mind you, at this point, I have a pile of parts. Just think of like all these in my hand, right? All these, and I've got cables, and I got shit everywhere on the table over there on the side. I've got the back off this thing. It's halfway in the middle of the floor, so I can run between the back and the front while I'm testing everything out. And I'm like, all right, let's turn it off. And also, I had the Raspberry Pi essentially connected to an edge connector, and it was just sitting in the arcade machine dangling like this. And that's not good, right? You don't want electronic components that could short out or hit things and cause shorts. You don't want that dangling in the machine. So I was like, all right, let's mount this thing to the wall. By mount this into the wall, I mean mount it to the wall of the arcade machine, just like they do the JAMA boards. Mount it to the wall, get it stable, get the wires, cleaned up, push it back against the wall, and we'll be done. So I go over to my power switch. I kill the power switch off the power strip, because at this point I've got the arcade plugged in, a monitor plugged in, the Pi plugged in, everything's on one strip. I hit the button, put in screws, make it nice and tidy, push it to the cabinet wall, throw the power switch, and it's dead. And I'm not talking dead, I'm talking DED dead. Okay, so I'm like, what? By this time, after doing all the configuration, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm cross-eyed as hell. I'm hungry. I'm tired. I'm angry. And now I'm not even getting a red light on the Raspberry Pi. Unhook a couple things, run a couple things. No power. I'm like, what the fuck? Now, I rebooted the machine a couple times because I had some ROMs get stuck. So I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. Why is it now no lights? I'm like, it's 2 in the morning. I got to stop. Go to bed. Wake up at like 10 or 11. I'm like, all right, let's get into it. And I'm troubleshooting. I'm playing with things. I'm connecting things. And I've got nothing. So I disconnect everything. I hook the Raspberry Pi up directly to a computer. Pi works. Okay. I must have fried the arcade machine. That's not good. Well, hook up the 5 volts back to the power supply. I grab one of my spare JAMA boards because I still have a Street Fighter the movie. I want to put it in a cabinet. Take it, throw that into the machine. The machine boots, the game plays. The only other piece now is this $170 JAMA adapter that's now DOA. And I can't really prove it because I've got no way of testing another. I don't have another CJ monitor. I've got no other. I've got other cabinets I could test with, but the VGA is not going to work. So, banging my head. Finally, I'm like, get the multimeter. Grab out the multimeter and I start testing the adapter. And I'm checking every flipping line. You know, I'm checking continuity from the GPIO pins on the back of the Pi to the connected GPIO pins on the adapter. Continuity is fine. I have the JAMA adapter plugged into the edge connector, connected to the Raspberry Pi, connected to the JAMA hat. And there's enough space where I can get the multimeter right here on the edge connector while it's all plugged in. Check the lines. There's power going to it. So I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. So I get online. I'm like, how do you test resistors? How do you test capacitors? And I find three resistors that have failed, and I find 2 capacitors that have failed. My best guess is that when I had the Raspberry Pi sending, 5 volts through here, out to here to the adapter, plus 5 volts coming in from the arcade machine, I fried something on the JAMA hat. So I'm like, well, that's $170 out the window, and I don't want to buy another one. So I take some photos of it, I blow it up, and I'm like, all right, I can buy these resistors and capacitors on Amazon. I'm like a little soldering, should be fine. So I order, 200 of each because that's all you can buy them in. And I got to wait 2 days. They come in, break out the soldering kit, desolder to the first couple capacitors, replace them. I was like, let's test it just before I go through the headache of doing all these parts. Let's just one piece at a time. So replace the capacitor, plug it in. And even though the ratings on the capacitor were the same, the size wasn't, and it caused a failure on the JAMA hat. And it was sending massive voltage through the speakers, and I was getting this sound that made it sound like I was drowning a cat coming out of the arcade machine. I'm like, well, that's not good, and I don't want to blow the speaker, so let's hurry up and disconnect this crap. Disconnect it, check a few more things, do another solder job, put it back in, same result. And by the way, I'm still getting 0 power to the Pi. I'm done. So rip it all out, just rage quit, throw the damn JAMA hat into the garbage, and I go get a glass of whiskey. And I'm like, okay, now at this point, I am 800 plus, I'm about 800 and, I don't know, let's just round it off to about, it's about $870 into the machine at this point. Because I was, like I said, 620 in the cabinet before I bought, a couple extra adapters. So that was like 650, let's see, 650 with all the adapters, and then another 170 for the JAMA hat. So 650, 170, 750, 820. So I'm $820 into this cabinet at this point. Plus now another $10 in resistors and capacitors that have now useless to me because the hat's fried. And I'm like, okay, so I'm in $850. And for me to basically move forward, my options are sell the cabinet with no working board for roughly what I paid for it and lose $350. Spend $1,800 for the real JAMA board and be way over budget on what is acceptable for the cost of a working Killer Instinct machine. Or drop another 170, buy a new hat. From all the lessons that I learned now, I can very quickly have this thing running because the buttons are actually configured. It stayed powered on and powered up and working long enough for me to configure all the games. So in reality, it's take the new JAMA hat, hook it up, unhook the 5 volts from the arcade machine, run power only from the Pi, and it's just going to run. So again, I told over this conundrum for maybe half an hour. And mathematically, it was still cheaper to spend another $170 on a new JAMA hat than it was to do either lose money on the machine or put real hardware in. So that's what we did. Placed an order, went about my day. Surprisingly enough, the new adapter showed up on my birthday, which was Friday. And I was at Disney and I called Dusty and I'm like, yo, I just got notification the new adapter made it early. It's in the mailbox. Go grab it, because it was really cold and I didn't want it sitting outside the cold. I was like, go grab it, hook it up. You know how to, you watched me do this. You know it needs to be done. Hook it up, tell me what happened. He's like, I'm going to go grab it. You blow your shit up, that's on you. Because at this point now I'm in $850 plus another $150 because I didn't have to buy the kick harness this time. I'm at $1,000 for this cabinet. And at this point now I'm pushing real hardware, full working cabinet price range. So he's like, I don't want to fry it. It's on you. Come home, play with it. So I do my thing at Disney, enjoy my birthday, come home, grab a drink, rip this thing apart, plug in the hat, unhook the 5-volt lines. We zip tie them. We, electrical tape so they don't touch and short nothing, and run the power directly to the Pi, hook up the hat, green light, she boots, screen comes up, and Bob's your uncle. So that's how we got to where we're at right now. I'm going to show you some video of it running, showing you how well it works. I accidentally turned the volume down in the game in the BIOS settings when I was setting free play. So now I got to hook the keyboard back up and get back into the configuration and turn the volume back up. But it's working. In the meantime, I also decided if I'm going to put this kind of effort into the game and put this kind of effort into the Raspberry Pi to run an emulator, I might as well load up some of my favorites, and then I can add more as time goes. So then I put just a ton of games on here. Some of my favorites. I did most of the Street Fighter, so Street Fighter 2 Champion, World Edition, Hyper Fighting, Super Street Fighter 2, Turbo, Street Fighter the movie, Street Fighter Alpha 1, 2, and 3, Street Fighter 0, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, X-Men Children of the Atom. Then I put all my beat-em-ups on there, so Captain Commando, Final Fight, Punisher, threw in Ghost and Goblins, threw in Bad Dudes, Smash TV, G.I. Joe, Hook, Moonwalker, some Sonic fighting game, which is really odd. And then Turtles and Simpsons are installed, but they aren't running on this particular emulator. So I need to take this thing apart and get into the main configuration of the software and manually add them to this particular emulator. So I got them all on one screen. But I've got Simpsons, Turtles, and then I put the 2-player ROMs on there so that you can pick any Turtle, any Simpson, etc. because there's only 2 control panels. But it's working, it's running. So I did a video, like I said, of me playing Killer Instinct on here. I'll show that now. And I gave you like how I fix everything. So let's just do a really quick recap on how to essentially take a arcade machine from Facebook Marketplace that has a working monitor and get it running with lots of different games. Okay, so first things first, get on Facebook Marketplace. Go to the tab, click local, and then search arcades. And then just start scrolling. You may find people that have fully working cabinets that they just want out of their house. Here in Florida, a lot of people own multiple houses. They own a lot of Airbnbs. So they buy these things for their Airbnbs to, when your kids are here, you got something. and either people abuse the hell out of them, or the Airbnb is no longer viable, or the people just want to do something new. So they sell these machines and they sell them cheap. And a good portion of them are not working because the people that buy these, they bought them from somebody else on Marketplace or business going out of sale. They put them in their Airbnbs. The Airbnb people beat the crap out of them, and the person that owns it has no idea how to fix it. And a lot of times the stuff is a cherry switch or a leaf button goes bad, so the switches don't work. Or maybe the hardware finally failed because somebody's powering off really fast, or somebody jammed the coin mech, or the coin mech failed. Like a lot of very basic things, or the monitor fails. Like the CRTs go bad, and they could either use a rejuve or they need a cap kit. A lot of times what you'll find is an arcade machine with a working circuit board, working buttons, but the monitors fail. And again, a lot of that's 10 minutes worth of work. I actually got into a bidding war with one of the guys over a Ultimate MK3 because the monitor didn't work. And what we found out was somebody jacked around with the machine and they knocked a couple of the cables loose. And because of its location and its difficulty to move, I finally stepped out of the bidding war. And the guy that bought it hit me up because, again, I'm in communication with a lot of the other arcade collectors. He was like, bro, the cable is just loose. He's like, I got this machine for $300 and literally it's fully working with 2 seconds worth of work. But so find yourself a machine on Marketplace. Look at if it's like, find out what's wrong with it. Does the monitor work and the board doesn't? Does the board work, monitor doesn't? And then make a decision. If it's the monitor doesn't work, but the boards do, you can buy a simple VGA adapter. You can take the monitor out, put in an LCD, hook up an adapter, and then use original hardware with an LCD. A lot of people do that. I don't. I hate LCDs inside real hardware. Or if the monitor works, but the board's missing or the board's broken or game doesn't boot, whatever, get yourself a Raspberry Pi. Once you have the Raspberry Pi, identify the type of monitor. If it's a standard VGA or CGA, and then get the correct adapter. If it's standard VGA, grab yourself a J-Pack, spend $55, and Bob's your uncle. If it's a CGA, buy the RPiCade hat, Bob's your uncle. Hook that up, and if you're doing just a regular, J-Pack with a regular VGA, you can use the RetroPie or RetroCade Raspberry Pi image that is pre-built. You download it, you get yourself software called WinImager, you install WinImager, you put in your SD card, you say, I want to write the RetroCade to this SD card, you hit go, it writes it, it configures the Pi, you plug in the SD card, and it goes. Hook up a keyboard, configure your buttons, there you have it. If it's the RPiCade hat, get its image file, load it, good to go. Now, let's say you don't want to do any of that, or let's say you want to build your own MAME cabinet because maybe you bought the cabinet, maybe you found a cabinet, it's got no board, no monitor, but everything else is there. Okay, $80 for the Raspberry Pi, buy yourself a LCD monitor, and then it's even easier. HDMI to monitor, get yourself a little J-Pack for $30. Run the terminals to the buttons, configure them in RetroCade, and there you go. Now, one of the other cool parts about running emulators on original hardware, so let's say you have like Killer Instinct. You have a good working monitor, you have a good keyboard, and you're going to run this. Running an emulator through all real hardware like this is the closest thing you will get to the real JAMMA boards. Everything is essentially authentic, and it looks really good. It plays exactly like you remember, and it's a great way to go. You could also hook up a Xbox controller. So when we were first configuring all this, we put an Xbox 360 controller in the Raspberry Pi, and RetroCade is pre-configured for the Xbox 360 controller. We were playing Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Sega CD. We were playing PlayStation 1 Spawn on this arcade machine with an Xbox controller. You could easily make yourself this really cool setup. And I've seen a lot of people do it. They take one of these shells, they run controllers and keyboards inside the coin door. So let me get my ass out of the way. They open the coin door, they pull out a keyboard, or they pull out a controller, they click on the SNES game or Nintendo game or PlayStation game, and they use the Xbox controller to play. And the Raspberry Pi 5 has enough power to run up to PS2. So we were playing like Twisted Metal, Spawn, Siphon Filter, like all kinds of PlayStation games on this thing using an Xbox controller. It was great. However, for my configuration, what I wanted for this particular setup was I only want arcade games running on this cabinet. I want Killer Instinct 1 to boot up. As soon as it boots, goes right to Killer Instinct 1. And then it's configured where if you hit both start buttons, you can exit to the menu and then pick a new game. So that's how I have this configured. Turn it on. Killer Instinct pops up. Play it, hit the buttons, switch games. And then if I want more games later, I'll just remote into it, add a bunch of ROMs to the file, to the folder, and off you go. To do the ROMs, now, Nintendo has been very adamant about shutting down emulation and emulator websites and pirate sites, as they like to call them. And they do a great job of it. And it's very hard to find ROMs now, except for the fact that with some of the laws that have changed, archive.org. So if you go to Google, and there's actually another detail we need to talk about here, so we're going to do that now. Go to Google, type in archive.org, space, and then whatever system you want to emulate, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Mega Drive, hit enter, and it will get you a link directly to archive.org's folder for those ROMs. So the complete NES, SNES, Sega, essentially every single game that's out there that can be copied has been archived. And you can go to archive.org, you can download the entire collection, put them into a folder on the SD card, and the emulator is going to pick them up. Or you can pick and choose games, because I don't need 7 different clones and bootlegs of Super Mario Brothers 3. I don't. Now, let's talk about one other caveat. Arcade emulators are very unique because there's actually different versions of the emulators that run different games better than others. When MAME first came out, it tried to emulate a lot of hardware and a lot of games, but it couldn't. So they did, revisions to MAME to support other game hardware and architecture and, how to emulate the connections, blah, 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 blah. Certain games like Capcom fighting games do not work well in MAME, especially when you get into what's called the CPS2 boards. Now, those were the arcade boards that came in giant plastic housings. They had reset switches and AV outputs and suicide batteries. And that was very specific hardware that MAME could not emulate. So there are special emulators just for Capcom games called like FBEU. And those emulate CPS 1, 2, 3 like great. And then there's games like Killer Instinct that only run well on a Raspberry Pi in certain versions of MAME, i.e. LR MAME, or what is also referred to as MAME 7.7.4 or 0.74. That is important to know because when you download the ROMs, if you get a ROM that is not compatible with the version of the emulator you're using, the game's either going to not play at all, play like trash, have issues, whatever. So when I specifically wanted Killer Instinct to match the cabinet, I had to make sure I had MAME 0.74 installed in the software, which I do. And I had to make sure I downloaded the specific version of Killer Instinct for MAME 0.74, the actual ROMs that go with that emulator, so that it worked. Killer Instinct also has the hard drive, so you needed that file also installed, and it also had to be 0.74 compatible. Again, archive.org, MAME 0.74 ROMs, and you will get the MAME version 0.74 with all the ROMs that are compatible with that version, with all the hard drive files, etc., 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 i.e. this thing's running. So that's how I did it. Throughout this video, obviously, I've sprinkled in different photos and shots of what the hardware looks like, how it's connected to my machine. If you want more details, I can do a very detailed video showing hooking up the Raspberry Pi, downloading the image. But honestly, there are hundreds of videos out there that show you how to do that. So If you want me to, I will. You want to ask me questions, feel free. If you don't, I don't care. For now, hopefully you enjoyed this video and the headache that I went through, and take the learning lesson. One, if you're going to use the best Raspberry Pi hardware out there to emulate an arcade machine in a real cabinet that you got off Facebook Marketplace for $300 to $500, make sure to get the RPiecade hat. Make sure you know which version of the monitor, CGA or VGA, and do not run both power to the Pi and from the 5-volt. One or the other, and make sure your arcade power supply is pushing a stable 5 volts if you expect the Pi to run. All right, guys, that's it. This is a long video. I appreciate you sticking with me. I need to fix some things on this cabinet. As you can see, one of the coin lights is out, so I got to get a new bulb. I do need to get some new coin switches installed on there because, like I said, the ones that are on there have failed. They've just been abused. And I think we're going to go through and buy the vinyl graphics, tear this one down, sand it, and restore it just like we did with NBA Jam. And I think I'm going to switch off of the black T-molding to a baby blue that matches the control sticks. I think that would look sexy. All right. With that, like, subscribe, follow, share, do all the things. Hit me up. And if you like the arcade content, maybe we'll do some more. I have a original Cabal JAMA board with with a replacement spinner sitting in my game room right now that needs a cabinet. I have Street Fighter II, the movie, that needs a cabinet. I have Street Fighter II, the World Warrior, that needs a cabinet. And then my Hyper Fighting Championship Edition is already in a retrofitted cabinet that will stay that way forever. So, all right, guys, maybe more videos to come, maybe more content. Maybe we'll do a video of doing the restore of KI. If I can find the original KI JAMA board for cheap on eBay, which I have an alert set for, one day I may rip the Pi out and put that back in. But for now, it's Raspberry Pi and it's Killer Instinct. All right, guys, I will see you next video. Thanks.